Much, Ken, and welcome everyone. Welcome here to Minnesota. I'm super excited about today's topic. Very big eye opener for me personally, and I'm very thankful that Tim is here with us today. So let me introduce to you today's speaker, Eian, a good friend of mine who is also based in the beautiful state of Minnesota in Minneapolis. There's a lot to be said about Tim. Tim has been in the industry his entire life. As a teenager, he grew up in Germany, got a master carpenter's title there. Later on, became an architect, has been active for over 20 years in Germany and the US. He founded an architecture studio in 2008, and he really went to work day one. His first building was a passive house in Wisconsin, one of the first in the whole country, which is super amazing. Has been very much involved with NAPHN, the Passive House Alliance US. He was a founder of it. He is a lecturer at or gave various lectures at the University of Minnesota, and currently is joining us from his very own passive house, one of the first here or the first in Minnesota. So very happy to have you, Tim. Thanks for making time for us.
Absolutely, thank you. Excellent. I'm happy to be here and excited to talk about our favorite subject today. I need to get a handle here on the screen. I think, okay. Yeah, today's lecture qualifies for one AIA unit for those who want to convey their information and pick that up.
Yep. Now I'll hand it off. Stop share. Take it away, Tim.
Yep. Share my screen here. All right, just want to make sure that that's visible. Sorry, I'm just trying to see my own screen, which at the moment I cannot. There we go. Okay, is that visible for everybody?
It's in the mode of like a preview mode or something. Speaker notes, presenter view.
Okay.
We had it a second ago, Tim.
Yeah, I know. And I don't know why it disappeared on me. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Is it getting any better?
It says it's starting to share your screen.
Still nothing. It's showing it for me.
You clicked on the application?
Yep. I'll do it one more time.
Might be sharing the wrong monitor.
Yeah. Did you have it? Put it exactly the way it was 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying all kinds of things here.
You might try unsharing and then just resharing again, let it reset.
And every time I do that, I lose my slide show entirely. So I have to find it again.
Picky, picky, picky.
Not had this before.
All right. Do I leave this presentation and come back to it? I don't know what to try. I'm sorry. For some reason, it goes into a Zoom full screen mode, and then I lose my presentation. And
Do you want to share it to me, the link, and I'll see if I can bring it up?
hang on 1 second here.
Sorry, everybody. We'll have this up and going in a second.
Or so we hope. So you can't see this? It's
Nope.
I,
This Timian has started screen sharing.
You're sharing the correct screen?
yes,
Sharing that one?
I am. Yep, they see a screen that says I'm starting to share my screen, and they can't see this. For me, it's all there. I don't know how to help myself.
You can send it as a PDF and they can follow along page by page. Email it as a PDF.
Anybody have any other ideas?
I mean, you could drop the link to me and I'll see if I can bring it up. Or yeah, to just export it as a PDF and just flip through a PDF.
I'm going to put it on a different monitor and share that.
Oh, we got it. You
There
got
it
it.
is.
That's it.
Okay, I lost my presenter notes in the process, but I can maybe move those somewhere else. Still working?
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. We tried it out in advance. I don't know what changed. All right, let's get going on this. So, Passive House, Minnesota, we were getting political here more recently, and we want to tell you a little bit about how that worked and you know, what we did and what we experienced, because I think this is valuable information for the whole community. In this presentation, I have sort of a 10 steps guide. I'm not going to dwell on that here on that list, but we're going to make that available as part of the slideshow. It's really sort of the order of events in which we proceeded to interact with our local partners here and try to make our voices heard. So we'll have that for reference. Starting out with a point that I call making connections. So if we back up from what happened here in the last 2-3 months, the whole process that we were dealing with here in Minnesota and the Twin Cities, to be more exact, in Minneapolis, really dates back many years by making links with local council people. This photo here was the ribbon cutting for our office Passive House retrofit some years ago. And in the center of the image, the person with the great smile on his face and the glasses is our local council member here, Kevin Reich, who is the council member for our ward. And we came across him based on mutual interest. You know, his interest is in energy efficiency, all things sustainability. He chairs a watershed organization here that deals with stormwater runoff and protection of the Mississippi and things like that. So having a link with somebody like that is always a good idea. And he also became instrumental once we started to do projects. You can see 3 examples here where he helped. I put on the slide, you know, examples that tested Minneapolis's Passive House's readiness. So as we started to do Passive House projects here locally, we found that there's all kinds of local ordinances, codes, and other little things that make that difficult at times. And so this link, this connectivity with local council members has been immensely helpful in seeing some of these projects through and enabling success in a timely fashion, I should say. Here's a nice shot of the council chambers, which I've seen from the inside a few times in my career, simply because some of these projects necessitated variances and other sort of hedge fights, I should call them, that we've had over the years. We have a set of particular zoning rules here that force us to do certain kinds of fenestrations and other things that can really get in the way of making a very energy efficient building. So I'm backing up to this point in time just to give you an idea. These touch points, these interactions are good to create relationship with stakeholders, get to know people who run departments, people who are staffers, and this enables then a better conversation down the road when we're talking about specific policy, which is one of the things that we're getting into here today. So another thing that I have on my list that I would encourage everybody to do is to be proactive. I've heard a lot of colleagues over the years come to me and say, you know, I'd love to do passive house, but I can't find anybody to do a passive house for, or there's my city, my town, my county isn't interested in this. And my advice is always, you have to turn this around. And this is also part of the policy track. You have to be very proactive in this game. You can't wait for others to come to your doorstep. You got to bring the fight to them. And so the case in point is INTEP is my consultancy. I do architecture, but I also offer just consulting services under this umbrella. And the policy that we're talking about today was actually preempted by our firm some years ago when we approached the council member and we said, you know, if you want the built environment to change, we're going to have to do some pilot projects here locally to get, you know, to allow people to dip their toes in this and get familiar with it and learn from it. And so some years ago, we gave the city a proposal for architecture and consulting services to do passive house pilot projects, mostly in the realm of affordable housing, so that they can try this on and also lead in the community. And so this is one great idea to strike up a conversation, you know, bring ideas, concepts to them. It doesn't have to be a shovel-ready project. Sometimes it's just a concept, but that stuck. And it sort of got turned around and came back. They wanted to do something to investigate this without building a building immediately. So that's really where we come closer now to our policy that we're talking about today. So the next step then, you know, once you pitch something and you start up the conversation, is to really stay in sync with your partners there. So following along with proposed policies for zoning, energy, affordable housing, tax credits, climate action plans, social justice, and health. Why do I bring all those? Because they all interrelate. Some of you may have seen that in your communities. A lot of the conversation around climate and climate action and climate change is linked very closely, not just to a climate action plan or tax credits and energy efficiency, but the social justice piece, because we tend to have great injustices in that particular arena. So people who are socially disadvantaged, financially disadvantaged, often have the least access to something that's energy efficient and cheap over time and things like that, good housing. And then health comes into play. We all know here during COVID, we've had countless seminars on it, you know, how a really good building is beneficial to the health of the occupants. And so that's where all these things connect. And we found it quite helpful to stay in sync with proposed policies and actions here locally in all those departments. And I put on the second bullet point that some local projects and consultancies were actually paid for by the health department of all places. And that is because they look at carbon in the atmosphere just like any other pollutant. It is something that will affect people over time and their health. And so the health department was actually, in my opinion, and experience the first department here in Minneapolis, excuse me, that actually put real dollars towards consultancies and actual projects. Another great place I should point out would be, you know, subscribing to newsletters that they put out. So Minneapolis, for instance, has newsletters by category. So you can subscribe to newsletters that relate to these subjects, and then you get it delivered to your inbox and you can see what the city council is up to, what they're debating, what policies they're looking at. And that gives us an opportunity to interact. Just a quick introduction then to Minneapolis's climate action plan. They want to reduce carbon emissions by 2025 by 30%. And then there's goals that stretch beyond that, obviously, but the most immediate impact is right here. And the reason why I bring up this slide is if you look at the graph in the lower right-hand corner, they specifically call out buildings as a major component of that. You can see that makes up the biggest chunk of that pie. So that means we have to do something differently in buildings, obviously, if we want to achieve that. And knowing information like that is helpful when we're interacting, again, with a municipality or county or a state, because now we have a hook, right? We need that hook. What's that story? What do we go for? And so they understand that a big piece of their puzzle is in buildings. And so now we have a reason to be at the table. So then last year, they hired my firm Intep. Instead of doing pilot projects, they decided, let's look at a study of comparison. And I've done countless of these over the years for different stakeholders in different places. But this one here specifically looked at affordable housing in the city of Minneapolis. The city is supporting single family, duplex, triplex, smaller buildings. And they have a little bit of a return on their investment in that they subscribe to the Minnesota overlay for green communities, or that's what they call it. So the green communities criteria, meaning they are asking for slightly better buildings to be built in that realm, and in return they put money into it. And so what they asked us to study was, well, what if we change this? What if we upgrade, in their minds, upgrade from Minnesota overlay for green communities to zero energy ready home, or to passive house, all with an eye on our ultimate goal? We want to get to net zero. And we all know and agree, net zero is such a wishy-washy term, but the way that they see that is ultimately no carbon emissions from the building industry. And then by proxy, we have zero energy and all these other things. So that was the starting point for a policy, is let's investigate this, right? And because most municipalities are not as immersed in the subjects as we passive house practitioners are, the only question they know how to ask is how much more? And I'm sure all of you on this call have heard that. That is usually the first and only question, that somebody can ask. How much more? And they mean cost. And they mean not only cost over time or social cost or carbon cost, they mean on day one. How much more is that passive house? And so this whole track started with that simple question. Well, we all know in reality, it isn't that simple. So in the report that we furnished, we investigated that for them, but also brought some other subject to the table, because cost is, social cost, again, cost of carbon, grid cost, and so on and so forth. So we expanded on that. And in that, I'm not going to go deep on this entire report here, and that could be another session, but I want to give you the lay of the land so you understand why this policy piece matters. In this, we explained to them, and this is a 10-year effort, I've been interacting with some of these partners for at least that long, that in our building industry, we really need to leapfrog. Again, I know there's a lot of passive house people on this in this webinar here, so you'll already understand that. But for the lay people and for policymakers, they often don't understand that. There is a perception that you take the existing building, you put some solar panels on it, and surely you can get to net zero energy. And especially in our climate zone in Minnesota, we have really harsh winters here, is absolutely impossible. It's ludicrous to think that that can work. But we gave them these graphics so that they can talk about this, with a little bit more perspective. So our standard building is that first tent, the one with the PV panels added to it, is the sort of upgrade to zero energy ready home or something like that. And what we're saying is, no, you got to leapfrog. Then, we investigate this on the energy consumption side. So the standard building that they build, single family home, 34,000 kilowatt hours consumed in an average year. You go to zero energy ready home. Both of these are basically Energy Star in the background with very subtle differences. There may be an improvement down to 28,000. And then you build it as a passive house, and now you're down to 11. And when we're talking about net zero and we're looking at a full offset on the roof, you can see the standard building they build today would take 3 to 4 of its own roofs for an offset with PV zero energy ready too. And passive house is ultimately the only one in our climate zone that has a chance to become net zero. So the energy piece we explained to them. So then we look at the investment cost and the energy cost, try to understand money. And really 2 key takeaways here. Passive house is the cheapest one to operate, and it has the lowest carbon footprint. Again, you can see these columns and how that shakes out over time. And if you're immersed in the subject, you'll have seen these things before. And then we took this even one step further, and we talk about the total investment cost to get to this net zero goal. So we're answering the question that was asked originally. Something that I personally actually found quite interesting is that at least in our local market here, for all intents and purposes, these 3 buildings cost the same money. So you can take a base building with the 3.5 roofs of PV, or the Energy Star building with little less, or the passive house with even less, and you come out at about the same price point. So the actual upfront cost for these 3 are seemingly the same. But the passive house obviously provides comfort, resilience, energy independence, so it is a much better value. And that leads us to the last piece that we gave them to inform policy, and that is, of course, what happens to our society over time. And social cost of carbon, they have a way of accounting for it with low dollars. Realistically, those numbers are going to be higher. But what we were showing here is that your social cost all in for a passive house is much cheaper than for any of the other approaches. And maybe more importantly, or from a practicality perspective, when you're having to set up a green grid to support all buildings, doing that with a passive house is a tall order. Doing it with the other two is seemingly impossible. We calculate that our winter peak load is increased 7 to 8-fold if buildings are continuing to be built the way they are now. The Energy Star, the slightly better zero energy ready home, 6 to 7-fold. And even for all passive house, we'd have to grow our green grid winter peak load capacity significantly. So the question became, where does our society want to put their money? In more power plants or in better buildings? So we illustrate all that, and then the big question is, what do they do with it? So they called for a public hearing to introduce a policy proposal. This thing is available on YouTube. If anybody wants to actually follow this track, it's going on right now. These are all current events. You can follow along. We can provide those links. But they came out with a sustainability policy. They overwhelmed us a little bit in that. They didn't really reveal that until the day of the presentation. We were under the assumption that that was an internal meeting, but a formal policy proposal was made, and the policy proposal was made for zero energy ready home. So if you followed my lead here, those 3 columns that I gave you, they decided they're going to upgrade to the one in the middle. So in other words, in this first attempt, they effectively overlooked all the benefits of the passive house, the better price, the resilience, the grid. So all of that was sort of discarded. And interestingly enough, it seemed like that had happened on a separate track. So it kind of makes you wonder why was the consultancy then even provided? So this is really the starting point now of how did we interact with them and in this policy proposal. So what did we do? Well, we did a few things. So earlier I said, attend the meetings, be part of this process, stay in sync. So the first thing was, for this presentation, we try to get as many of our own people in to listen in on this. More ears hear better, more information, and we're able then to collaborate later on a response. So you see some of our faces here. We have Marcy, we have Bronwyn from National, we have Eian who announced me, and Peter and Janneke. These are just some of the folks that were able to engage in this process. And so what we did is we listened to this policy proposal, we grabbed the information that they made available on the website, and then we brainstormed in part solo and in part jointly to put forward an outline for a response. So in this policy track here in Minneapolis, they have to put it out publicly, the information, and then they give, I forget what it is now, 4 weeks or something like that for a public comment period. So we decided we're going to go for this public comment period. We're going to basically tell them what we think about that. And so in these smaller groups, we put forward our own outlines. We set up meetings about once a week to follow up with each other and sync up, all with the target of, we're going to supply on this date a concise slate of feedback to help inform this process. Some of the things that we did is we looked at shared goals and vision. Super important. It's easy to pick something apart and tell them, you didn't listen, you didn't read this properly, you didn't understand that. But quite honestly, none of those things help anybody. It just makes people feel bad. And so I will highlight Bronwyn again as somebody who's really positive on this and really helped us also frame the conversation in a positive way. So identify where we and the city and this policy, where we're on the same sheet of music. Don't overlook the stuff where we're not, but then immediately come up with solutions. So don't pick it apart, but pick it apart with the goal of showing a fix and showing a track that is a win for everybody. And so we did that locally with Bronwyn. We did it nationally. And Bronwyn actually also helped connect some of the international dots. That's sort of maybe a little bit of a side story here, but still helpful. You know, politicians thrive on leadership and being recognized in that regard. And so one of the things she did is she's talking about COP26, so the next climate action conference, global conference, and appealing a little bit maybe to the vanity of local politicians and suggesting, if you do the right thing or something really forward looking here, you could have a part in that and you could demonstrate leadership in a cold climate. And so these are some of the positives, that we were trying to bring to the table. And then last but not least, we try to, as a group, build confidence in Passive House, not just the approach, by reiterating over and over again that it is not just some proprietary system, because I think the industry and politics too is a little sore on the lead and the green communities and some of these more proprietary standards, but making clear that Passive House is sort of footed on top of universally applicable building science rules. And then in addition, talking about our community, local, national, international, so that they understand this is not just two people coming up with a rad idea, but it is actually something that is supported nationally, internationally, and backed up and has pedigree. The next thing we did is we provided resources internally and externally. So we mounted a little bit of a campaign. I'll get to that in a second, but we pooled all the information that our people here locally, nationally would need to help formulate our response. We did that on our website. We did it in some newsletters that we shared with our community. Passive House Minnesota has around about 1,000 people on a newsletter list. And so we put together this list here, anything from the consultant report, watching the public presentation on YouTube, the policy proposal, linking to that, offering where you can send your comments. Then we'll get to an online petition here in a second. Learn about what a passive house is. Some of our stakeholders may not be as immersed in it than we are, so start from scratch, give them that. And then a couple of documents that have much more breadth and more of a global perspective. There was one here from the Preservation Corps, a report on the benefits of underwriting financing for passive house buildings, how to contribute with these buildings to national or international databases so you can rank yourself and get a better feel for where you are. And then, a global study of multiple passive house buildings, verifying that that is a valid international approach that solves a problem for municipalities. And then, encouraging people to also stay in sync, watch the City of Minneapolis public comment page. So this is basically the toolkit, right? So if anybody wants to onboard and come into this process, we provided them with all the information they need to do so. And then just real practical, to most of us here during COVID, this seems like second nature, although as you saw in the first 5 minutes, it doesn't always work on the first attempt. But we utilized all the tools that we had at our disposal: video conferencing, shared online documents, co-authoring of our documents, crafting an online petition. I'll highlight Eian here, who introduced me. He took the first step and he created our very first moveon.org petition. So we felt this was important enough of a subject that we want to get some traction. So we basically formulated a public comment that people could underwrite on moveon.org. We use websites to identify stakeholders. So we went out and we scoured the City of Minneapolis website to learn a little bit more about some of the players, so that we can seek conversations with them directly. And some individual contact was had with people outside of this process, just to understand, who are the staffers, who are the stakeholders, get on top of the timeline, when will you be posting updates, things like that. So a little bit of backdoor sleuthing maybe, and then front door knocking, all happening at the same time using these tools. And then we reply to this basically I would say in 3 ways. So we mounted a campaign to speak with one voice, and we did that internally. So this is the official reply letter from Passive House Minnesota. So in our chapter, we pooled our resources and we gave them an official reply. And again, if you really want to go deep here, we'll show you some resources you can actually follow up with this process. But the point here is, in the beginning, I talked about being positive, calling out shortcomings, but offering solutions. And that is exactly what we're doing here. There's an introduction that talks about our concerns. And then instead of the proposed policy as written, we propose the following. So there's a section in the middle where we switch from picking apart mode to putting it back together. And what we propose, just to kind of bring it back to the policy for a hot second here, is to raise the minimum bar and make this zero energy ready home essentially something that nobody can go below. So instead of making it sort of the target, the be all end all, make it the baseline. And then if you're funding projects, that's something everybody just has to deliver. But if you're putting funds in for the efficiency in particular, make sure they are only directed to either a passive house or FIAS or something that's at that level of performance and delivers that net zero target that they're looking for. And then we gave them some pointers too, by pointing out that taking the industry there incrementally, we're out of time to do that. And if they have to learn something new, it doesn't really matter if they learn a little or a lot, they have to retool anyways. So we kind of outline and give them some tools that they can use internally to justify going down this path. So that was the speak with one voice, Passive House Minnesota reply. Then didn't quite get to the million, but I thought it was fitting for the slide. We mounted the moveon.org petition. And so this was our attempt at bringing in people beyond our own community. So don't just stop with the passive house people. It's better to get others involved as well. And so this would have been triggered by our newsletter and other means, personal messaging, making people aware, neighbors, spouses, what have you, why don't you go there? And actually that was live national, or it is anyways, but we shared that information so that people from all over the place could come to it and sign it. And my screenshot is a little bit older. Maybe we've eclipsed 100, and I don't know. I think it was only a year to go up to 100. I don't know what happened thereafter. But ultimately, the feedback from here was picked up, aggregated, and then on that due date was shipped over to city staff and the council person in charge. And then the last piece, individual citizen engagement. So for those who wanted to go beyond simply signing the moveon.org, it really felt like they had something to say. We encouraged a bunch of people to produce their own feedback and send it. And I don't have any accounting of that because I'm not on the receiving end of it, but I know that of quite a few people here locally who, in addition to signing the petition, drafted their own letters and sent their own letters. To broaden the spectrum, I alluded to that. We put all of this on social media as well. You can see some of the posts here. So Bronwyn, helping a little bit on the national front, together with NAPHN headquarters, obviously, and then our own social media channels and some of the personal channels. So again, this goes to activating the tools that we have. And if I remember right, Bronwyn had some really good feedback from some people online, including somebody who was participating in the IPCC report. So this would be an international player who, is sort of an influential person in that realm, and that's great. Bronwyn had a follow-up conversation with a local council member here, and this is the kind of stuff that, of course, is really helpful if you can demonstrate that there's recognition on an international stage for what a puny little policy is doing here in Minneapolis. I think it just puts a different gravitas on the whole thing. So then we follow up with the Kevins. Interestingly enough, both the staffer and the council person are Kevin, the stakeholders, of course. Very important. One of the things that we found is that these public processes are great. They're trying their best to get everybody involved, but they're a little bit opaque. So after we delivered our feedback, there was a sort of a painful moment of silence. There's no immediate feedback loop on that once you put your information into a process like that. So we kind of had to draw that from our partners. And again, we shared that workload. Eian was involved, I was involved, Bronwyn was involved. So we went out and we talked to these people. We sent them emails to say, hey, did you get all this feedback? What'd you do with it? And so the big end, what became of these efforts. So for maybe a week or two, we had no idea. And I'm happy to report, as of a couple of days ago, on the city's website now, I don't know if you can make this out at all, but this is the policy now enacted with changes and updates. And actually, it's quite interesting, where we had a hard time getting feedback on whether they enacted this policy or annotated it or changed it in any way. Really, the most meaningful feedback I've been able to find is that not 4 weeks later, they have now approved funding for 6 projects under this umbrella, and 4 of them are specifically called out as passive home. I'm not entirely sure what that means for every single one of them, but essentially what's happening here is that they did make these changes under the hood to the policy to put the funding specifically towards the net zero goal, using Passive House or FIOS as a vehicle to get there, and then linking their funding to it as best as we know. I have not seen a final draft of that policy, but what we're seeing here is the policy in action. So I'm drawing a conclusion based on what I already see. So the City Council approved 4 projects, and then a couple of other pieces that relate to this here, I think, that are essentially funding for this process. So I would say it was worthwhile, and it looks to be a success, if not, you know, a full commitment maybe to the Passive House standard in writing that we've seen, but the end result seems to be there at the moment. So that's what we were able to do, and I think that was really in large part to this interaction that we've had with them. I'll go through a couple of things that we learned along the way. So you got to be aware of the local proposals. I said that in the beginning, and the feedback mechanism, it's sometimes a little opaque. So don't be disappointed if you don't see that or don't see it right away. It can be a little bit of legwork to get there. Quickly rally the troops. A lot of this stuff I find in our history here at Passive House, Minnesota, we find out about it and we have to almost immediately do something. Often things are not announced as publicly or as flashy as you would like them to be. So by the time you hear about it, you're like 2 days away from having to put in a petition or something like that. We saw that on the tax increment financing process here for the state for affordable housing, where our group became aware of that literally within days of the deadline of public comment. And then, you know, you really need a format for your coordinated response that can be circulated. So, you know, me writing something or Etienne writing something is great, but it becomes much more powerful if we can collaborate and share it. And again, COVID has taught us a lot about these virtual collaborations. And so I think some of those experiences are good and will be helpful going forward. The weekly status meetings I thought were really powerful internally. It's all volunteer driven, right? So give people small goals, immediate target to come back. That worked for us. And we had sort of a core group of 3 or 4 of us who took care of most of it. Point out the shortcomings, but offer positive reinforcement and pathways to success. Maybe that I should have bolded, because that's probably the most important thing that you can do. And then provide these useful resources along their way, and illustrate that decision makers are not committing to a fringe movement, but that there is some cachet and pedigree to what we do. I think those are all very important points here that we learned. Also, a couple of things that we didn't consider at all, mentioned it now a couple of times, no immediate feedback loop on the process. I'm not a public policy maker, nor is anybody else in our group, so we had no idea how this works, and some of it was opaque and was anticlimactic. And so the policy proposal changed a little bit, and during the comment period already, we saw that there was a dynamic. That's also something we hadn't really considered, so I felt like they were maybe moving in our direction a little bit during the comment period, but our feedback was offered, you know, based on the initial proposal. And then the opaqueness of it, how do you directly influence beyond comments? At one point, we got a little worried because we didn't see the final policy. And so we were wondering, you know, have they changed any of it? What does it actually look like right now? So I suppose you got to brace yourself for the fact that nobody's going to immediately come back to you and say, here's all the things we did and this is where this stands. So that really threw us a bit for a loop there in the middle. I want to make sure to point out all the people that were part of this, some of them by name, because this involved quite a few people, including, of course, the city council and staff, the council member Wright, Kevin Canase, Kim Havey, and Alfred Laporte, and others. You know, we can't bring to you this information today without people like that, and also the steps they had already taken prior, which I gave you in the introduction. So we got to give credit where credit is due. Maybe on that note, you know, people who work in our democratic process, there's a lot of staffers there and there's a lot of processes. And I think sometimes it's easy to lose sight of, hey, let's just do this really good thing. And while we can all agree in principle, you know, we're still changing the world and reshaping it from the inside out. And it's not easy for people. And so I give everybody credit, and there were more involved here than that. You know, for the part that they did and how they're trying to reshape their city. And then, of course, all the people at Passive House Minnesota and NAPHN who are still helping. This is not done. We're still talking about this. And Bronwyn in particular, because she's, you know, beyond all the other things that she's doing, she's really helping with this policy piece. And then the people in our community who also participated here in the feedback loop. So next steps for us or you, if you engage in a policy track, would be, you know, make an offering, Passive House training, connect people to Passive House certifiers, connect to local practitioners. And as NAPHN, we're doing better and better aggregating these resources on our website, so it becomes easier. We have these wonderful reports and handbooks that are coming out after conferences. So make use of these tools, put them in people's hands. Talk to local developers, make them aware of what's going on here. And then also in our cold climate zone, we still struggle a little bit with Passive House compliant products. So talking to more people about that, talking to prefabricators and doing all those things. So that's, you know, where we're going next, beyond keeping an eye on other policies that are popping up locally. And then again, making use of the resources, right? So NAPHN is working on a policymaker resource right now. I grabbed a couple of slides here from a deck that is being put together. So we have this. So some of what we experienced firsthand, you can now see manifest itself here in a handbook or a PowerPoint deck that will be available to the entire NAPHN community, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel and figure this all out, but you can learn from other people's experience and hopefully make it a success out of the gate without squandering volunteer time. This one here is also a wonderful slide that I found in that deck. You know, how can cities begin? Because for so many places in the US, even though climate change has been an issue for decades, they're still at the very beginning of how do we transform? What do we do? And so here is a sort of 5-6 step process from where are we today to all the way to, you know, let's update our code so that we don't need any more REACH goals, REACH standards, or voluntary building standards to make this a success. So I think wonderful resources. And I'll close on that note and switch over to Q&A. Thank you for listening to my monologue and putting up with my Google woes over here. I hope you found this interesting, and I would like to offer that, you know, we can do a lot as a community if we collaborate.
Perfect. Tim, thank you very much for sharing this super motivating story. Fantastic. Congratulations to the city of Minneapolis for doing that, and to everyone who was able to do this. Right now, we would like to open this up to questions. I've been monitoring a little bit the chat here, not a ton, a few more comments, I would say, but please do not hesitate. This is your time. We have Tim here, and he's happy to answer whatever you need to know. I got a good comment here, and if you maybe, Tim, you want to say something here from Bruce. Only 30 on board. Where is everyone? Great presentation, Tim, and all. Great help to us all. And I think that's a really good point, the 30, right? Because initially, I was always under the assumption that you need this ginormous group to change anything, right? You think about the demonstrations sometimes that you see, or big gatherings, but it didn't take so many people. What it really took was, it took committed people, a small group. And it's not just here in Minnesota. also, and Ken can probably speak about it too, any of these code changes have been done with a small group, people who don't give up and keep on working on that. So I think what matters are who are these 30. Tim, Ken, any thoughts about that?
Tim, you want?
Sorry. Yeah, I had myself muted here. I couldn't agree more, Etienne. I think you're absolutely right. It's all about getting the right people in the room. I think we've all experienced that probably in our professional and personal life. And I put the slide back up here because those were probably the most engaged players in this process here. That's all it takes is a few committed people to the process. And it also doesn't necessarily have to kill days of your time. It probably did in my case because I was also involved as a consultant. But the point is, I think you can do a lot with a few people, especially with the tools that we're given these days. And so I would encourage everybody to not shy away from it because they fear they don't have the resources. I think quite honestly, if I had to go it alone or with you, Etienne, or maybe UI and Bronwyn or something, I think we would have still made a tremendous impact on this conversation, and it would have been worth it. And so I would encourage anybody there not to shy away from this because they think it's bigger than them. I think the part that we all have to remind ourselves of, and maybe in this election year, you've seen that too, is at the end of the day, you know, that single voice still counts. It still matters. Sometimes it's the most important one because it's the one that moved the needle. And I would say it's no different here. I can't tell you exactly how many comments the city of Minneapolis gets when they propose a policy and they have a public comment period. But I would have to take a guess that, you know, there's maybe some people who make that their hobby to follow along with stuff like that. And maybe there's a couple of professionals who have a stake in a race like that. But I would have to take a guess that on a sustainability policy or financial support policy for small scale affordable housing, there's probably not hundreds of people who typically put in a comment. So if we're coming in as a group here and we're providing 120 or 150 comments, we just own that space. So we can do a lot like that.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much. There's a question from Anthony. Tim, is there thought to expanding this approach at policy change to St. Paul and some of the inner ring suburbs?
Yeah, so now that I just said it doesn't take a ton of time, and of course somebody still has to go there. And so as Passive House Minnesota, that was immediately a conversation that we kicked up too. It's like, okay, can we, you know, who can be our St. Paul person or Edina or St. Louis Park person or what have you? I think the benefit we had on this particular piece is that our firm was hired as a consultant, so we were already pretty close to this particular one. I think the biggest challenge or hurdle is us becoming aware of when these things happen and the timelines associated with it. And we're just at the beginning of that. And that certainly does rely on, you know, 1, 2, 3 of us volunteers within the group to subscribe to the right newsletters or follow the right websites in the cities to find out, you know, what's the next thing coming up. We already know in Minneapolis, they're renegotiating the climate action plan next year. So that's something that we have on our radar. I would say anybody here in our vicinity can certainly contribute to that by simply keeping an eye out for what's happening when and where and making the group aware so that we can repeat this sort of a process in other places. That would be huge. I think the process itself is maybe less of an issue. It's more this like when and how do we find out about it? And for that, it would help to have maybe a little bit more roots in the community. And so if you live in St. Paul, follow the City of St. Paul Urban Development Department, for instance, or if you're in one of the suburbs, the same thing. That would be tremendously helpful because we can't have all these relationships all at the same time at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. One other point, and that's talking with me during a conversation, Tim. So the policy we were able to influence here was basically a 1 to 3 unit affordable housing financed by the city, right? But there are a lot more policies out there or updates. Could you maybe talk about where do you see more potential for us to have an impact and maybe apply lessons learned here locally?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, great question. So we've already engaged a little bit with the tax increment financing track for multifamily affordable housing. We came into that at the tail end. There have been some others. It would be unfair not to make mention of that. For those of you who know Tim McDonald, he's been here years ago, and he lobbied the Minnesota State Legislature some years ago when they were debating that. And that happened again sometime this year. And there's also a couple of maybe more fierce-leaning folks here who have contributed to that and put their time into those processes. So I would say multifamily housing, the tax increment financing, I think they're on a 2-year cycle or something like that, if I don't get that wrong. So that would be one worth getting in on. And then certainly in Minneapolis, looking at, how can we go from the small scale to the larger scale, I would say. We've also talked a little bit with our local partners here about state. State is much more difficult, is a much bigger hurdle, perhaps. And from everything that I've ever heard is that there's just more resistance there. I think on a city level, it's more boots on the ground. You're talking with people with a little bit more influence. I think the political game, the further you go up the chain, sort of the stakes rise and the interest rises, and the special interest and lobbying, it happens at a completely different scale. So where on a local level here, we're able to make a dent. I know that on a state level, for instance, we have our work cut out for us, because the builders associations here in Minnesota are really outspoken against any changes to building code, and have been for decades. And they own that space. And so that's a completely different fight. And it's all worth going for, but I think we have better success on this level and this scale at the moment. Again, these are also our direct representatives, like a council member in our own ward. And so if they know we got their back, and they know there's a mutual benefit here, they can just go for it. On a state scale, tougher. So I know I branched out a little bit from building typology to the level, but I think they're sort of interconnected, those two.
Perfect, thank you. I have actually 3 more questions. The next one is from Max. Tim, maybe I missed this, but can you list again the specific documents or policy mechanisms in place to encourage passive house in Minneapolis and Minnesota? Does this go beyond the climate action plan? I know you mentioned TIF as well. Was this part of an affordable housing policy?
Yeah, I get the question. I think that's maybe something we can take in a email exchange or something like that. So I mentioned it during my presentation. I have not been able to locate the final draft of this policy. So if you're looking to a specific document that says passive house, they still have, I think, on their website the first draft up. And we saw during this process that there can be a significant lead time between them adopting something and it going on the website. So I don't have it. I can tell you in Minnesota, for the multifamily affordable housing and the tax increment financing, the way they solved that is they deferred it to green communities, because that applies to state as well. And in green communities, there is one paragraph that specifically calls out FIAS and PHI buildings as a reach goal under green communities for affordable multifamily buildings. So if you dig deep enough into the Minnesota tax increment financing documents via green communities, you can find that written up, but not that I've seen it any more specific than that anywhere.
Perfect, thank you. Then we have a question from Juanita. There was a social justice component in your proposal. Did you spell this out in detail to demonstrate how adopting the passive house standard addresses social justice?
We did by proxy a little bit. So none of the things that we brought were extremely detailed, in part because that's not the platform to do that. We're not really solving anything for anybody. We're basically suggesting that it has all these benefits. I know in the report, we talked a little bit more about that, but again, not in our official reply. You saw those documents were, basically a page or a page and a half long or something like that. You can't go in there and solve all these issues. And it would be up now to the stakeholders to say, hey, maybe we want more community engagement around these subjects and bring somebody from Pass FOSS Minnesota to that table when we're having those conversations. But yeah, I think we have to, and it's not about this subject in particular, any subject. You know, we have to be careful that we stay at sort of the whatever 20,000 foot elevation there. You know, we're not hired as consultants to solve something specifically for them. We're just telling them, if you do this, then that, and there's a backing in the community, you get all these other benefits. So we're just trying to inform it on that level without solving it specifically. That would be the policymaker, staff, and consultant job now to bring information to that table. And maybe on a personal note, you know, I wish that there would have been more focus on that when they asked the original question, because again, so often building well is dumbed down to how much more. And it's really sad because we all know that there's so many other benefits that come from building well, and there's just never really a platform. You have to make that platform to talk about it. It is because of our firm, we brought the whole grid conversation, we brought the sustainability conversation, the health conversation, the social justice conversations to that subject. It wasn't a question that anybody asked, but we felt we need to bring this to the table as well. So I will say that that's a passion project of mine, and I think of a lot of people in our community, but unfortunately the conversation is very often dumbed down to dollars and cents only.
Perfect. Thank you. Last question is from Sean McStay. What suggestions do you have to find policymakers who have something to gain from supporting our movement? Are there specific goals or projects you look for in their agendas?
Yeah, I have to think about that for a second. I said in my presentation, and I really mean that they thrive, of course, on us helping them have a success. So, you know, going back to this, where is that slide here? Do you see that, the slide of the ribbon cutting? So local politicians, you know, they need that, right? That's what they're in it for as much as anything. They want to do the right thing and whatnot, but they need those moments. And so if we can give them those moments, that to them, that's what success looks like to them. And so we had this, we also had there was a FIAS multifamily building, and there was a ribbon cutting for that, and the same council member and the mayor was there. And so these are the moments. So if we want to make it easy for them, if we can give them a series of these moments, that'll help all of us.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Tim. That actually brought us to our final question. That was the final question. I would like to thank everyone today for attending. I think it's a very important point to share. I also want to invite, if any of the people who watch this or who are on the call today or watch it later, if you're based in the Midwest or frankly anywhere and you're interested in joining us, please join Passive House Minnesota. I think we are now at a stage where we really found something. We found a way to make an impact. And I'm going to be very honest with you. We had many meetings over the years, and we were trying to navigate what we want to do with this chapter. And you know, we were kind of a little bit teaching to the choir, so to say. But I really think we have identified action items now, and it's extremely exciting to be on the forefront. And it's just crazy that we were able to have success on our first goal. That is not always a given, and I think that should fuel us for years to come to fight the good fight. And please join us. And with that, I want to hand over back to Ken. Thanks for giving Passive House Minnesota the spotlight this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim, and everybody for joining today, and great questions and conversation. Really inspiring in terms of these efforts and successes. It's you know, one success at a time, and it's really important. I think conversation from one city to the next city, to one state to another state. We can all build from each other. So NAPHN looks forward to working with everyone, providing more resources and helping us build momentum. So thank you all for joining us. And we'll put this video up online, and we will be following with some of those resources that Tim was teasing us with in the presentation. So have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.